Lawyers are not magicians, or at least most lawyers are not magicians. And a lot of things that you think an aggressive attorney can do might really destroy your family if you're thinking of a family first solution. You got to be very careful with this. Now, if you don't have children and you're just fighting over money, this might not necessarily apply to you, but this is more thinking about where you have some type of family because you have children for decades and you have to think about post-divorce issues like that, like co-parenting. Welcome to Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind. I'm Corey Shapiro. This podcast is helping you make better decisions before things go crazy. And that usually happens when you're activated and when you're acting on not your best self, not your wise self. So this podcast is trying to bring you back to your wise self. Maybe pause before you act on something that might have negative long-term consequences. The goal of this episode is to talk about this idea of hiring this fantasy attorney, this shark who's going to, you think, solve all your problems, but maybe cause more damage than you anticipated. So my message to you is, lawyers are not magicians, or at least most lawyers are not magicians. And a lot of things that you think an aggressive attorney can do might really destroy your family if you're thinking of a family first solution. You got to be very careful with this. Now, if you don't have children and you're just fighting over money, this might not necessarily apply to you, but this is more thinking about where you have some type of family because you have children for decades and you have to think about post-divorce issues like that, like co-parenting and going to major events and just having a civil relationship. The definitions I want you to think about is the difference between a controlled fire and a wildfire. And I guess I'm thinking about fires just because in the news, there was all these fires out in LA. And I was just thinking about what skillful firefighters do is sometimes they set these controlled fires to suppress something that can be really out of control. That's a technique. And that's what I want us to think about. And there's different types of attorneys, and I just want to go over them. There's the swarmer, which is someone who focuses on a lot of different issues, but these issues are not necessarily important. I call this noise, but this noise rattles you. It distracts you, gets you out of your best side, and it's really effective at the highest levels because they come at you with so many different issues. You don't know what's going on. And then there's the brawler, which is opposite of the swarmer. They only focus on maybe one issue, maybe two issues at most. But those issues are deadly, or they think they're deadly. And if you have one of those issues that are case ending, that's where you really got to talk to your attorney and become really truthful. You don't want to wait throughout the court system and wait to a trial just to get shamed and embarrassed and lose your case. And a lot of times that happens. And then you have the boxer attorney, which is an attorney who's family first, sort of like a doctor who does no harm. That's the boxer. And they're very tactical. They're not trying to be forceful unless force is needed. They're trying to be like those skillful firefighters with controlled fires. And then you have the top dog. In New York City, those are like the primo attorneys. They're billing well over $1,000 an hour, and they can do everything at the highest levels. They can be a swarmer, better than the best swarmers. They can be a brawler, and they obviously can be a family-first attorney. And you just got to be careful which top dog you hire and what the instructions you give that top dog, because they can do everything, and they can do everything well. So let me give you a couple examples to think about this concept of a controlled fire, where you have an attorney who could be aggressive, but it needs to be measured, versus an attorney who's just going to blow everything up and have this crazy wildfire, what I call a derailed divorce. All right, that's what we're talking about. So what I usually see with the wildfire approach is sort of like the attorney setting a tone. They're setting a tone. So instead of commencing a divorce action, reaching out to you by email, seeing if you're going to accept service, they're going to serve you at work or after an exchange. It's just something to get you a little off balance. And it continues. They take aggressive positions. Let's say you're a day late on child support. Already they're contacting the court. Let's say there's an issue, could be a very minor issue on a parenting schedule. Maybe there was some traffic and you were 15 minutes late or 20 minutes late dropping off the children. Next thing you know, there's an application to the court. See, what are they trying to say to you there? What are they trying to say to you there? And that's the sort of wildfire technique. Now, that can be very effective, that technique, if you don't want to get into this type of mess. But if you really have something you're fighting for, and I would only suggest you be in a divorce, and that's why we talk a lot about the vision. It's in my book too, and we're going to go over it, all the time about the vision. If this is not important to you, don't go into these difficult divorces because it's just going to get worse. And I think that's sort of what these attorneys are doing. They're just coming at you with all this pain over nonsense because they want you to settle the big issue. Okay, so my paraphrase for you is you don't need to come in hot. You just have to come in wise. And my action steps, usually you see this when you're interviewing attorneys. And it's hard because usually you're interviewing attorneys, you're in a bad place. You're not coming from your best self. And maybe you do want to be aggressive because you feel a little pushback, but you're not thinking of these long-term consequences. So maybe you could ask this attorney, have you ever de-escalated a case? What have you done when someone's been maybe done something bad, but not terrible, and how have you resolved that? And if you're not getting an answer that makes you feel good, then that's probably not the right attorney for you. And I caution you, even if the other side's acting out, what I'm trying to help you here is to think about the long-term consequences to you, to your children, and to this hybrid family going forward for decades, which this attorney is not focused on. And let me just give you my, lawyer hat, straight talk perspective here. Lawyers, especially litigators, someone who goes to court often, we get paid through time. That's what we're selling, time. So just think of it. There's only an incentive for these litigators to make things more difficult and to make things drawn out. But how is that family first? Right? How is that a controlled fire? How is that smart long term? That's what I want you to think about. This is difficult stuff, but you got this. You're watching this podcast, you're doing the work. You're stopping that urge to, go explosive when you're activated, coming from your worst side of yourself. And I know it's not easy, but I have faith you can do it. So it takes time. And you're going to get through this. I'm Corey Shapiro. This is Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind. Thanks for watching.
This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.